My name is Jessica Collins, and I'm 41 years old. For the past 15 years, my family has treated me as though I'm their greatest disappointment, a kind of cautionary tale of what happens when you refuse to settle down. The irony? During those same years, I quietly became one of the youngest female chiefs of police in Texas history. That contradiction was pounding in my head as I sat in the last pew of St. Paul's Episcopal Church in downtown Austin, trying to keep my expression neutral while the organ droned on. The air smelled faintly of lilies and floor polish, the kind of scent that clings to every church funeral I've ever attended. Up front, my cousin Andrew Bennett was delivering a heartfelt eulogy for our grandmother, Mary Collins. He was painting her as a saint who had spent her life teaching the importance of family values, faith, and sticking together through thick and thin. I stared at the polished oak of the pew in front of me, resisting the urge to roll my eyes. Just 3 months ago, that same grandmother had looked me straight in the face, her voice still sharp despite the chemo, and said, "Jessie, honey, when are you going to get a real job and settle down like your sister Amanda?" She had meant it kindly, or at least she thought she had, but the words still carried the same sting they'd had my whole adult life. I reached down, smoothing the front of my black dress. It was simple, conservative, cut just below the knee, the kind of thing you could wear to a funeral without drawing attention. But I'd deliberately chosen one without any visible sign of my rank. My police badge was tucked into my purse. The collar pin that marked my years of service sat in a small velvet box at home. That's a habit I've developed over the years, not hiding who I am out of shame, but because the reaction from my family is so painfully predictable. The last time I'd worn my full uniform to a family gathering, my aunt had mistaken me for a mall security guard. To them, I'm still the awkward kid who left college early to a play cop, instead of getting married and producing adorable grandchildren for my parents to brag about. My older sister Amanda, the golden child, has done all that and more. She's got a husband who owns a construction firm in San Antonio, 3 photogenic kids, and a sprawling house with a swimming pool. She's the one they toast at family dinners, the one who always gets seated next to Grandma Mary. Amanda was sitting in the front row now, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, surrounded by her family. The sympathetic murmurs from the surrounding pews made it sound like she was the only grandchild who had truly been there for Grandma. No one in this room knew that during the last year of Grandma's life, I'd driven 3 hours each way on every weekend I could get off duty. I'd sat beside her hospital bed in the middle of the night, listening to her stories, holding her hand when the chemo made her too sick to speak. I never mentioned it to anyone. I never posted about it on social media. The truth is, I learned long ago that telling my family about what I do, about any of my work, is pointless. They either don't understand, or they don't care. When I first graduated from the police academy, full of pride and hope, I came home for Christmas in my brand new patrol uniform. I thought they'd be proud. I thought my parents would want to hear about how I'd finished at the top of my class in defensive tactics, how I'd been selected for the Special Crime Suppression Unit that only took a handful of rookies each year. Instead, my mom had barely looked up from basting the holiday turkey. "That's nice, dear," she'd said, before adding, "Amanda just got promoted to vice president at her company. She's making 6 figures now." From across the kitchen, Amanda had smirked and said, "Well, at least one of us has a real career." That was nearly 2 decades ago. The comments never really stopped. Since then, I've commanded SWAT operations in Houston, negotiated with armed suspects in Dallas, and spent the last 4 years running the entire Austin Police Department. I've testified before the state legislature, briefed the governor in person, and received commendations for actions I can't even talk about outside of closed-door sessions. My officers trust me with their lives. My city trusts me to keep them safe. But to my family, I'm still their single sister with the tiny apartment and no real plan. The sermon droned on, and I felt that familiar not form in my stomach. I wondered if there would ever be a time when my own family saw me for who I actually am, and not the version they've carried in their heads since I was 22 years old. What I didn't know, sitting there in that dim church, was that before the afternoon was over, they were going to find out. If there's one thing my family excels at, it's crafting a perfect narrative. In theirs, Amanda is the sun, and the rest of us just orbit around her. Amanda has been the favorite since the day she was born. She was the first grandchild, the first to graduate from a respectable college, the first to marry, the first to give my parents grandchildren. Every milestone she hit was celebrated with balloons, parties, and long-winded toasts. Me. My milestones were treated like quirky day tours. When I made detective at 26, one of the youngest in the Austin Police Department's history, the reaction was a polite nod from my mother and a reminder that Amanda had just closed on a new 4-bedroom house. Even now, at Grandma Mary's funeral, the contrast was impossible to miss. Amanda was front and center, dressed in a sleek black designer dress, her husband's hand resting protectively on her knee. Their children, perfectly behaved, perfectly dressed, sat quietly beside them. People leaned over to whisper to Amanda, touching her arm, complimenting her, telling her how much Grandma adored her. They didn't know, or didn't want to know, that in the last 2 years of Grandma's life, Amanda visited twice. Once for a family Christmas gathering, and once because Grandma had guilt-tripped her into stopping by on the way back from a vacation. By contrast, I'd made the trip from Austin to Dallas almost every weekend I could get leave. I'd hold Grandma's hand when the nurse from chemo left her trembling. I'd bring her fresh flowers from the farmer's market because she loved the smell of lavender. Sometimes we'd just sit in silence, the TV on in the background while she dozed, and I'd be there when she woke. But none of that fit the narrative. In the family's collective memory, Amanda was the dutiful granddaughter. I was the career-obsessed one who had chosen work over family. The truth is, I learned to stop correcting them years ago. Early in my career, when I still thought explaining myself would help, I'd try to share bits of what I did. I'd mention the long nights on patrol, the adrenaline of a high-stakes arrest, or the delicate skill it took to negotiate with someone holding a gun to another person's head. Instead of admiration, I'd get confusion or mild disapproval. Sounds dangerous. Why would you want to do that? You can't do this forever, Jesse. It's not a stable life. What about your future? Don't you want something more? More. As if saving lives, dismantling drug operations, and pulling people from burning cars wasn't enough. Amanda's amour was her husband's thriving business, 3 kids in private school, a Pinterest-worthy home, and vacations to Maui twice a year. My amour was a department of 2,000 officers who depended on my leadership to get home safe at night. But that version of success didn't compute for them. The last Christmas we'd all been together, I overheard my Aunt Linda whispering to Amanda in the kitchen. It's sad, really. 40 years old, living alone, still chasing bad guys. No family, no stability. At least you've built something real. I'd stepped outside into the cold night air, letting their words sink in. Inside, they were laughing over eggnog, parsing plates of sugar cookies. I was on the phone with my deputy chief, reviewing the plan for a New Year's Eve operation to prevent a suspected gang retaliation. It was like living in two worlds that never overlapped. In one, I was respected, trusted, and relied upon. In the other, I was the underachieving younger sister. That divide became even clearer as the funeral service continued. I watched Amanda carefully dab at her eyes, her every movement graceful and practiced. She didn't glance back at me once. She didn't need to. She knew exactly where I stood, literally and figuratively. From the front row, she was the one who belonged. I was in the back, tucked away like a distant cousin or family friend. The irony was, I could probably recite Grandma's medical chart by heart at this point. I knew which medication made her dizzy, which one had to be taken with food, which nurse she liked best at the oncology clinic. I knew she hated the way the hospital coffee tasted and that she loved when I brought her those lemon scones from the bakery on South Congress. Amanda, on the other hand, had once asked me if Grandma was still doing that radiation thing, 8 months after she'd finished it. As Andrew's eulogy wound down, I could feel that familiar mix of frustration and resignation building in my chest. I wasn't angry at Amanda for being who she was. I was tired of the fact that my family seemed incapable of seeing anyone else. And as much as I'd gotten used to it, there was a part of me, deep down, that wondered what it would be like if, just once, the people who share my blood looked at me with the same admiration they so easily gave her. That, of course, was wishful thinking. Or at least, that's what I thought, until the next few moments proved me completely wrong. The thing about being the chief of police is that almost no one outside your department truly understands what you do. And in my family's case, they've never bothered to ask. They didn't know about the months I spent undercover in Houston, posing as a low-level associate for a gun-running crew just to get close enough to their leader to take him down. They didn't know about the night I negotiated for 6 hours with a barricaded suspect holding 2 children hostage, and walked out with those kids in my arms. They didn't know about the sting operations I'd planned in Dallas that took millions of dollars in meth off the streets, or the countless hours spent reviewing bodycam footage to make sure my officers were safe and following procedure. And they certainly didn't know about the commendations. The Texer's Medal of Valor, the Distinguished Service Cross, the Governor's Award for Bravery. All of them were tucked away in a shadow box in my home office, gathering dust. If I brought them up to my family, they'd just change the subject to Amanda's latest real estate flip. The truth is, part of me let them believe their version because it was easier. I remember one Thanksgiving, maybe 6 years ago, when my Aunt Linda pulled me aside. "You still in that same little apartment near the station?" "Yeah," I said. "At least you don't have a mortgage to worry about," she added, like she was trying to console me. What I didn't tell her was that I owned 2 rental properties outright, both paid for in cash, and I chose to live near the station because my role demanded that I be on call for emergencies. They think my old Ford Explorer means I can't afford anything nicer. The reality? I spend half my life in department-issued vehicles and the other half on the streets. Flashy cars don't make sense for me. Last year at Christmas, I overheard my uncle chuckle to Amanda. "Jess is pushing 40 and still hasn't figured it out." That same night, I'd been finalizing a citywide tactical plan for New Year's Eve, coordinating SWAT, traffic control, and community outreach programs to keep thousands of people safe during the celebrations. The very next day, I was briefing the mayor and city council on crime statistics, proposed budgets, and community policing initiatives. My decisions directly impacted millions of dollars in resources and the safety of over 1 million residents. But in my family's narrative, I was still the one who couldn't get her life together. I had stopped expecting them to care years ago. Still, Every once in a while, I'd catch myself imagining what it would be like if they knew. If they understood that my days weren't just filled with chasing criminals, but with leading, planning, and making choices that sometimes meant life or death for the people under my command. But I'd always shut those thoughts down quickly. They weren't interested, and I wasn't about to waste energy trying to make them see. As I sat there in the church, my eyes drifted to Amanda again. She looked every inch the grieving granddaughter, her expression solemn, her posture perfect, her black dress uncreased. She could have been on the cover of a magazine, elegance at a funeral. I wondered if she even remembered the last real conversation she'd had with Grandma Mary. I did. It was just 3 weeks before she passed. Grandma had been in her hospital bed, her voice weak but her eyes still sharp. "I worry about you, Jessie. You're always working. Amanda says you hardly have any friends. That's no way to live." I'd wanted so badly to tell her about the people who were my friends, my officers, my detectives, the ones I'd pulled out of danger and who'd pulled me out in return. I wanted to tell her about the camaraderie, the shared purpose, the way we'd celebrate after a big bust, or the quiet respect we showed each other after a tough loss. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled and said, "I'm doing fine, Grandma. I'm happy." She'd squeezed my hand. "I just want you to have what Amanda has. A real life. Real success." Her words had settled on me like a heavy coat, one I couldn't take off. So when my cousin Andrew wrapped up his eulogy and the pastor stepped forward to make an announcement about a special presentation in honor of Mary Collins, I didn't think much of it at first. But then I saw Amanda stand up, smooth her dress, and walk to the front. Her expression was pure poise, her voice steady as she spoke into the microphone. "Many of you know that our grandmother was proud of the family's history of service. Her husband served in the Korean War, and she always believed in giving back to the community. So, in her honor, I reached out to the Austin Police Department to arrange a presentation." For a moment, I froze. And then the church doors opened. The heavy oak doors at the back of the church swung open with a low creak. The sound made everyone in the pews turn their heads, including me. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, their polished shoes clicking against the stone aisle. The first was Captain Miguel Rodriguez, tall and broad-shouldered, with the same steady, unflappable presence I'd relied on for years. Behind him walked Sergeant Emily Harper, carrying a neatly folded American flag in her white-gloved hands. I knew them both, not in the casual, we've-met-once kind of way, but in the I trust you with my life way. Rodriguez had been my deputy chief before transferring to head the state's tactical training division. Harper had been with me through more late-night call-outs than I could count, including the night she saved an officer's life by pulling him out of a burning patrol car. The sight of them here, in full dress uniform, made my pulse spike. Captain Rodriguez's expression was solemn as he approached the pulpit. He stood beside Amanda, who smiled warmly as though she'd arranged something deeply thoughtful and symbolic. She still didn't realize what was about to happen. Rodriguez's voice carried easily through the church. "On behalf of the Austin Police Department and a grateful city, we honor the memory of Mary Collins, grandmother of one of our most distinguished leaders." A small murmur rippled through the crowd. I could almost hear the gears turning in their heads. "Leaders?" Amanda tilted her head, still smiling, probably assuming this was a standard, scripted acknowledgement. She glanced toward the audience, likely imagining how good this would look in the photos she'd post later. Rodriguez continued. Mrs. Collins raised a granddaughter who has served this city with exceptional dedication, rising to the highest levels of law enforcement through courage, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to justice. He paused, scanning the pews, until his eyes found mine. It is our honor to present this flag to the family of Chief Jessica Collins, in recognition of her grandmother's support throughout her remarkable career. For a moment, you could have heard a pin drop. The hush was so complete that even the hum of the ventilation system felt loud. Amanda's face shifted, confusion first, then disbelief, and finally, something that looked a lot like panic. Her hand, still holding the microphone, trembled slightly. From a few pews ahead, my mother's voice carried back, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Chief? Jessica is a chief?" Rodriguez, to his credit, didn't break his professional bowing for even a second. "Yes, Chief Collins is the youngest woman to serve as chief of police in Austin's history. She currently commands a department of more than 2,000 sworn officers and civilian staff, overseeing operations that protect over 1 million residents." There was a faint thud as someone, I think my Uncle Ray, accidentally dropped a hymnal in surprise. Sergeant Harper stepped forward, the folded flag cradled in her hands like something sacred. She held it out to my mother, who took it with trembling fingers. From my place in the back, I stood. My legs felt steadier than they had in years. All eyes followed me as I walked down the aisle, the rows of family members parting in silence. When I reached the front, Rodriguez snapped a salute so crisp it echoed faintly in the high-ceilinged space. "Chief Collins." I returned it without hesitation. "Captain Rodriguez. Thank you for being here. Wouldn't miss it, Your grandmother would be proud." I didn't answer right away. Would she? I honestly didn't know anymore. But I could feel something I hadn't felt in this family in 20 years. Respect. Amanda finally found her voice, though it came out uneven. You're really a chief? But you live in that little apartment. You drive that old Ford. I live on department property because my job requires it, I said evenly. And I drive a practical car because most of my travel is in city vehicles. A shiny sports car doesn't exactly fit when you're responding to a homicide scene at 2 in the morning. The words hung there, uncomfortably sharp. My mother's eyes were still fixed on me, her expression a mix of awe and regret. "All these years, or we thought." "You thought I'd failed," I said for her. That I'd wasted my life, that I should have been more like Amanda. I didn't raise my voice, but the quiet firmness made the truth impossible to dodge. Rodriguez cleared his throat gently, as if to bring the focus back to the ceremony. For her service, Chief Collins has been awarded the Texas Medal of Valor, the Distinguished Service Cross, and numerous commendations for bravery in the line of duty. She has personally led operations that have saved countless lives. I saw my cousin's jaw drop. Someone whispered, "countless lives," like it was a phrase they couldn't quite wrap their head around. And, Rodriguez added, she reports directly to the mayor and the city manager, and serves on the governor's Public Safety Advisory Council. The image they had of me, the floundering, single little sister with no plan, was unraveling right there in the front of the church. And for the first time, I wasn't shrinking from it. I was standing in it, letting them see exactly who I was. The silence after Rodriguez's last words was thick enough to feel in my bones. My family sat frozen, processing a version of me they'd never considered possible. Amanda's perfectly composed funeral face cracked first. I. I had no idea. We had no idea. I know, EI said, my voice steady but without venom. I tried to tell you in the beginning. You didn't want to hear it. Her mouth opened, then closed again, as though the right words were hiding somewhere behind her teeth. My mother still clutched the folded flag, her knuckles white. Jessica, why didn't you make us understand? I looked at her, this woman who had raised me but never really seen me, and felt a strange calm wash over me. Because it shouldn't have mattered, EI said. Even if I'd been a patrol officer my whole career, living in a tiny apartment and making ends meet paycheck to paycheck, I still would have deserved your respect. I still would have been your daughter, your granddaughter, your family. That landed like a stone in water, rippling outward, impossible to take back. From the third pew, my Uncle Ray tried to lighten the moment. But we're family. We should have known. No, EI corrected. You should have cared enough to ask. You should have been proud that I served, regardless of my rank, instead of measuring me against some narrow idea of what success looks like. I could see Amanda flinch, and my mother's shoulders sagged as though the truth had been a physical blow. Captain Rodriguez, sensing the tension, stepped forward slightly. If I may, he said, Chief Collins has commanded critical operations in multiple Texas cities, coordinated state and federal resources, and implemented new protocols that have already saved lives. Her leadership is recognized not just in Austin, but across the country. Sergeant Harper added softly. She's been in situations most of us only read about. Hostage rescues. Active shooter incidents. Natural disasters. And she's always there, first to arrive, last to leave. I caught Harper's eye and saw the glimmer of respect there, the kind that can only come from someone who stood next to you in a dangerous moment. My cousin Derek, who had given the eulogy minutes earlier, looked at me like I'd grown a second head. You've been in combat situations? Like actual shootouts? More than I can count, EI said simply. It's part of the job. A murmur went through the pews. This was no longer the awkward, unmarried sister they thought they knew. This was someone entirely different, someone they'd underestimated for decades. Amanda's composure crumbled. Tears welled in her eyes, not the delicate kind she'd shown earlier, but the raw, uneven kind she couldn't control. Jessie, I'm so sorry. I've treated you like you were less. And I didn't even know who you really were. Her voice broke on the last word. I wanted to tell her it was okay, but the truth was, it wasn't. Not yet. The pastor, perhaps sensing the service had drifted far from its planned course, gently guided us back to the program. The flag presentation ended, Rodriguez and Harper gave final salutes, and then they slipped quietly out the side door. But the air in the church had shifted. For the rest of the service, I felt every glance that flicked toward me. Some were curious, others wary, a few even admiring. The story of a Jessica the disappointment was crumbling in real time, and they didn't yet know what to replace it with. When it was over, we moved to the gravesite for the burial. The January wind cut through my coat as we stood in a tight cluster, the minister reciting familiar words. The thud of dirt on wood marked the finality of it. Around me, relatives who had once offered me polite nods now wanted to shake my hand. They told me about their nephew in the Marines, their neighbor's son in the FBI. They looked at me as if I had suddenly become someone worth knowing. It should have felt good. Instead, it felt hollow. Because I knew the truth, they weren't suddenly proud of me for who I was. They were proud because my title impressed them. And the difference between those two things is the difference between real connection and shallow approval. Still, I stayed. I listened. I accepted their handshakes. Because in that moment, it wasn't about me, it was about laying Grandma Mary to rest. But deep down, I knew that when the dust settled, would have to decide what came next. The cold wind at the gravesite finally chased most people back toward their cars. I lingered, standing by Grandma Mary's headstone, the folded flag still in my mother's hands a few feet away. The January sun was dipping low, turning the bare oak trees into long shadows stretching across the cemetery grass. For a brief moment, it was quiet. I could almost imagine the day ending that way, just me, my thoughts, and the low hum of traffic from the highway. But then I saw Amanda walking toward me. Her mascara was smudged, her hair slightly windblown. She wasn't wearing the polished, untouchable expression she usually carried. Instead, she looked human. "Jessie," as she began, her voice low, "I don't even know where to start." "Start anywhere," I said. "I'm sorry." She took a shaky breath. "For years, I've treated you like you were somehow failing. Like your life was small. I thought I understood what you did, and I didn't care enough to find out the truth. Today, I realized how wrong I've been." Her words were raw, but there was also something hesitant in them, like she wasn't sure if this was the right script to use. Before I could answer, my mother approached. She still held the folded flag tightly against her chest, almost like she was afraid someone might take it away. "Honey," she said softly, "I can't stop thinking about how we've talked to you all these years. All the times we assumed you weren't living up to your potential. And all this time," as she trailed off, shaking her head. "All this time, I finished for her. I was doing the job I was meant to do. The one I chose. The one I love." Amanda looked down, her hands twisting together. "I don't know how to make it right." "It's not about making it right with me," I said. "It's about whether you're willing to actually see me now, not the version you've been comfortable believing in." For a long moment, none of us spoke. The wind tugged at the edges of Amanda's coat. Somewhere across the cemetery, a car door slammed. Then my Uncle Ray joined us, his cheeks red from the cold. "Jessie, I've been thinking, if I'd known you were doing all that, I'd have bragged about you to everyone." "You didn't need to know my title to be proud," I replied evenly. "I was still serving my city even when you thought I was just chasing speeding tickets." He chuckled awkwardly, then fell silent when he realized I wasn't joking. When we finally left the cemetery, the family gathered at my mother's house for coffee and pie. Normally, these gatherings felt like endurance tests, the same old conversations looping over and over. But this time, there was a new current in the air. People kept glancing at me, like they were trying to piece together the gaps in the story they thought they knew. My cousin Mark sat across from me at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee. "So when you say operations," he asked carefully, "what does that actually mean?" "Like SWAT?" "Sometimes," I said. "Other times it's large-scale event security, criminal investigations, coordinating with federal agencies. It's not just one thing, it's everything that keeps a city safe." His eyebrows rose slightly, but to his credit, he didn't push for gory details or treat it like a Hollywood movie plot. Amanda stayed close to me most of the evening, almost like she was afraid I'd slip away before she could fix whatever she thought was broken between us. She kept asking questions, small ones at first. What my typical day looked like. How many people reported directly to me. Whether I ever got scared. Of course I get scared, I told her. The trick is to move forward anyway. Fear's just part of the job. She nodded slowly, as if that answer unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. By the time I left, it was past 9. My car was parked under a streetlight, frost already starting to form on the windshield. As I slid into the driver's seat, my phone buzzed with 3 new messages, all from relatives who'd barely spoken to me in years. We should get coffee sometime. Would love to hear more about your work. Proud of you, cousin. I stared at the screen for a long moment before setting the phone face down on the passenger seat. Part of me wanted to believe they meant it. Another part knew that for some of them, this was just a new chapter in the ongoing family politics, one where I was finally interesting enough to be included. And I wasn't sure which version I preferred. The drive back to my apartment near the station was quiet except for the hum of the tires on the highway. Austin's skyline rose in the distance, glittering against the cold night air. I'd always loved that view, not for the buildings themselves, but for what they represented. My city. My responsibility. When I pulled into the secure lot behind my building, I didn't go inside right away. Instead, I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, watching the vapor of my breath fade in the chilled air. My phone was still face down on the passenger seat, buzzing occasionally with new messages. I didn't check them. I already knew what they would say. Pride. Surprise. Curiosity. From people who, until 6 hours ago, had barely asked me how I was doing for the past decade. Inside my apartment, 2 rooms, functional furniture, nothing fancy, I hung my coat on the rack by the door and dropped my purse on the counter. The silence was comforting. Out there, I was the chief, every move scrutinized, every word recorded in someone's memory or on a body cam. In here, I was just me. I poured a glass of water, leaned against the counter, and replayed the afternoon in my head. The look on Amanda's face when Rodriguez said my name. My mother's trembling hands around the folded flag. The way the room's energy shifted in an instant from dismissal to stunned recognition. For years, I'd thought about what that moment might feel like, the day my family finally saw me. And now that it had happened, it wasn't what I'd imagined. Yes, the validation was there. I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good to watch their old assumptions burn away in real time. But the deeper truth was harder. I hadn't needed their approval in a long time. My mind drifted to the first years on the force, when I had needed it. When every holiday I'd go home with some new accomplishment, hoping it would be the thing that finally earned their pride. Passing the sergeant's exam on my first try. Making detective ahead of schedule. Leading my first successful raid. Every time, the reaction was the same. A quick nod, maybe that's nice, and then a pivot to whatever Amanda's latest achievement was. Eventually, I stopped bringing it up at all. That decision had hurt then. Tonight, it felt like one of the smartest boundaries I'd ever set. Around 10, I finally picked up my phone. There were 17 unread texts and 9 missed calls. Amanda had sent the most. Can we talk? I don't want to lose you again. I keep thinking about what you said at the cemetery. You're right. We didn't ask. Please let me make it up to you. My mother's messages were more measured. I'm proud of you. I should have said that a long time ago. Your father would have been proud too. I stared at that one for a while. My father had died when I was 20, before I ever joined the academy. I'd never know if he would have supported my path, but tonight, I hoped he might have. I typed a quick reply to Amanda. We'll talk soon. But I need some space right now. Then I silenced the phone and set it aside. In the quiet, I thought about my team, the officers I'd see tomorrow morning at the briefing. They didn't care whether my family understood me. They cared that I could lead them well, make decisions that kept them alive, and stand by them when things got rough. That was the approval that mattered. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this day had shifted something. Not just in how they saw me, but in how I saw them. I'd spent so long keeping my professional life walled off from my personal one that I wasn't sure I wanted to open that door now. Because the truth was, the sudden interest from my family didn't erase 20 years of disinterest. And if they were only showing up now because they liked the title of chief, then nothing had really changed. I set my alarm for 5 a.m. Tomorrow was another workday, another round of decisions and responsibilities that had nothing to do with whether Amanda approved of me. As I climbed into bed, I realized something that surprised me. I could live the rest of my life without my family's recognition and be perfectly fine. But after today, I wasn't sure if they could live without mine. Sunday morning came earlier than I wanted. My alarm blared at 5, the same as every workday, and I went through the motions: shower, uniform, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. By the time I stepped outside, the city was still half asleep, the winter air crisp against my face. The station was quiet when I arrived. Most of the day shift officers wouldn't be in for another hour, but I liked these moments, the calm before the storm. I walked through the empty hallways. The familiar scent of coffee brewing in the break room, mixing with the faint tang of disinfectant. Today's briefing was routine: updates on patrol coverage, a review of recent burglaries, a reminder about the upcoming community safety fair. But even as I reviewed my notes, my mind kept drifting back to yesterday. To Amanda's tears. To my mother's trembling hands on the flag. To the way everyone suddenly leaned in when I spoke. For most of my career, I'd kept my personal life and my work in separate boxes. That division had been deliberate, partly for safety, partly because I didn't trust my family to handle the truth without judgment. Now, for the first time, that wall was cracked. And I had to decide whether to open it further or seal it shut again. On my desk sat a small stack of envelopes, sympathy cards from coworkers, city officials, even a few community members who'd heard about my grandmother's passing. But tucked underneath them was something unexpected: a white envelope with my mother's handwriting. Inside was a short note. Jessie, I'm sorry for not understanding the life you've built. I want to change that. I hope we can start fresh. Dinner at my place next weekend? No expectations, just a chance to talk. Love. Mom. I read it twice, then set it down. It was more than she'd said to me in years, but I couldn't tell yet if it was genuine or just a reflex to the public reveal. Around noon, Amanda called. I let it go to voicemail, listening a few minutes later as her voice played through my office speaker. Jessie, it's me. I keep replaying yesterday in my head, and I can't shake how wrong I was. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I want to try. I want the kids to know who their aunt really is. Call me back when you're ready. Her words were careful. Sincere, maybe. but also tinged with the same performance I'd seen her use on social media followers, the practiced vulnerability that photographs well. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the city skyline through my office window. If I let them back in, I risked them slipping into old habits once the novelty wore off. But if I kept them out, I was essentially closing the book on my family altogether. That night, I went for a run to clear my head. The streets were quiet except for the occasional passing car. As my feet hit the pavement in a steady rhythm, I thought about the people I did consider family. Rodriguez, who'd stood beside me in the church without hesitation. Harper, who'd put her own safety on the line more times than I could count. The officers who'd followed my orders in dangerous moments because they trusted me to get them home. Those relationships weren't built on blood or obligation. They were forged in shared purpose, mutual respect, and the certainty that would show up for each other when it mattered most. By the time I reached my apartment again, I'd made my decision. I would answer my mother's dinner invitation, but not to start over on their terms. This time, the conversation would happen on mine. No more pretending my life was smaller to make them comfortable. No more letting their narrow definitions of success dictate how much of myself I shared. If they wanted to know me now, they would meet me exactly where I was. As Chief Collins. As someone who had spent 2 decades serving a city, not chasing their approval. The next weekend, I pulled up to my mother's house in my unmarked city-issued SUV. Amanda's minivan was already in the driveway, along with my uncle's truck. Inside, the smell of roast chicken filled the air. My mother greeted me at the door with a tentative hug, and Amanda appeared from the kitchen, her smile uncertain but hopeful. For a moment, I stood there, looking at them both, the two women who had shaped so much of my early life, for better and for worse. "Let's talk," EI said. And this time, I meant it. We sat down at the dining room table, the same one where I'd eaten countless holiday meals as a kid. Back then, my place had always been at the far end, the extra seat, away from the center of conversation. Tonight, my mother gestured for me to sit in the middle. The chicken was carved. The green beans steaming, but nobody touched their food right away. Amanda folded her napkin in her lap, then looked at me with that mixture of guilt and curiosity I'd been seeing since the funeral. "I don't even know where to start," she said. "Then start with the truth," I told her. She took a deep breath. "The truth is, I judged you without understanding you. I measured your life against mine, and when it didn't look the same, I assumed it was less. That was wrong." My mother nodded slowly, her eyes on me. "I think I convinced myself you were chasing something temporary. That one day you'd come to your senses and live like Amanda." She winced at her own words. I see now how unfair that was. The conversation that followed was one we should have had years ago. They asked questions, but not the shallow kind, not about my salary or whether I'd ever met anyone famous. They wanted to know what it felt like to walk into a dangerous situation, to make split-second choices that could save lives or end them. I answered honestly, though I kept some details vague. I wasn't here to shock them or win their oar. I wanted them to understand that my work wasn't just a job. It was my calling. At one point, Amanda's eyes filled with tears. "I think I was jealous," she admitted quietly. "You had something you loved so much you were willing to give everything for it. I don't think I've ever had that." Her words surprised me, but they also softened something in me. Maybe for the first time, I was seeing her as more than the role she played in the family story. We ate, we talked, And by the time dessert came out, the tension that had shadowed so many family dinners was gone. It wasn't replaced with some perfect Hallmark movie warmth. We weren't there yet, but it was lighter. Still, I knew this was just the beginning. Respect earned in a single afternoon could fade just as quickly if I let old habits slip back in. So before I left, I told them, if we're going to move forward, it has to be real. No comparing me to anyone else. No measuring my worth against your version of success. You either take me as I am, or we don't do this at all. My mother reached across the table, her hand warm over mine. I take you as you are, Jessie. And I'm proud. Amanda nodded, her expression serious. Me too. Driving home, I thought about those words. I wanted to believe them, and maybe I did, cautiously. But I also knew that if their pride was tied to my title, it wasn't the kind I needed. And the thing was, I already had the kind I needed. When I pulled into the station lot the next morning, the officers on the early shift were milling around, coffee in hand. Harper spotted me first and walked over. Morning, Chief. Heard the service went well. It did, EI said. Thanks for being there. It meant more than I can say. Wouldn't have missed it, Ishi replied with a grin. We've got your back, always. As I walked into the building, nodding to the patrol officers and detectives who greeted me, it hit me again. This was my real family. Not because we shared DNA, but because we'd stood shoulder to shoulder in situations most people couldn't imagine. Because we had each other's trust, and we earned it every single day. They knew me, the real me, and they respected not just the badge, but the person wearing it. That night, after the day's work was done and the city was quiet, I sat in my apartment with a cup of tea. I thought about Grandma Mary, about the last time I'd sat beside her hospital bed. Back then, she told me she wanted me to have a real life. I smiled faintly into the steam of my tea. I had one. It just didn't look like what she, or my family, had imagined. The satisfaction I'd felt at the funeral wasn't from shocking them or earning their praise. The real victory was knowing I'd built a life of purpose without needing either. Tomorrow, there would be another briefing, another operation to plan, another call in the middle of the night. And I'd show up, just like always, not for their approval, but because it's who I am. The chief. The officer. The woman who found her place, and chose to stay there. And that was enough.